Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, March 4th, 2022, we're continuing to cover Day 9 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And we have a lot to cover today. And first and foremost, we're going to jump right in and look at the battlefield overview of what is taking place. And again, the picture within the confines of Kiev is starting to become more apparent in terms of some of the strategy that Russia is attempting to utilize. And as I talked about in previous videos, the Russians right now are slowly and methodically cutting Kiev off. And that looks like their operational plan right now within the area of operations near Kiev. We know that elements of the Russian army have cut off the E40 into Kiev and continue to progress south and then south in a southeasterly direction in an eventual attempt to cut off Kiev. They're trying to stay some distance from the built-up areas closer to Kiev proper. Again, the Ukrainian army has the ability to launch anti-tank guided weapon systems, javelins, call-in artillery, using the built-up areas very close to Kiev. So an instance would be in this case here. And we've seen some of the destruction of buildings where some of these apartment blocks have taken direct hits, and we believe that quite possibly Ukrainian military units obviously would use these buildings to both fire anti-tank guided weapon systems and call-in artillery on Russian units moving to the west and to the north of some of these locations on the outskirts of Kiev. And again, these areas are incredibly built up, as you can see here, and serve as an incredible defensive barrier for the Ukrainian military. And at the same time, we also know that the country is mobilizing. So a lot of the male civil populace, to include some of the female civil populace, are being handed out weapons and are producing various other weapons, to include Molotov cocktails and improvised explosive devices for the upcoming battles that could take place inside of Kiev. So again, this is a very slow, methodical process that I don't believe we're going to see at this point a direct Russian attack into the city. The Russians are going to try to do their best to cut the city off from supplies and then starve the city out in a classical type of siege engagement to prevent the large loss of military life from a direct move into the city. The Russians attempted a reconnaissance in force into Kiev, and unfortunately for the Russians, that did not go very well. They met with tenacious Ukrainian resistance, and that has caused this new strategy by the Russians. I would say it was a new strategy, but it was probably in all likelihood a planned for contingency plan in case they met maximum resistance, and that's what they're facing right now. It would be maximum resistance. So the Russians are adapting to the battlefield conditions and are changing their game plan, so to speak. In the northeast of Kiev, we continue to see the Russians advance. As you can see here, the Russians are sealing off towns instead of having to go in and engage and destroy the military units that are operating inside of these towns. So in all likelihood, in the case of this area here, there's probably a Ukrainian National Guard unit that is fighting at the highest level of its ability to prevent the Russians from entering. They may have some javelin systems that have caused the Russians to back away and again seal off the area and then continue to proceed further. And we're seeing that really across the vast areas of this huge battlefield, which is Ukraine. We continue to see the Russians batter Kharkov and attempt to surround it. Again, you're seeing the Russians, as opposed to encircling it around the main E40 and E105 ring road, around kind of like a beltway around Kharkov. You're seeing them encircle it from at a greater distance. And again, that is because there are Ukrainian artillery units based in Kharkov. They obviously have a host of anti-tank guided weapon systems that have that 3,000, 4,000 meter engagement range, depending on the system that they're using. So again, you're starting to see the Russians just try to cut these towns off at distance, continue to move in reconnaissance elements, and then shell areas where there are resistance. In the further south, we've finally had the map update where Mariupol has been enveloped. And again, we understand that all power has been cut off to Mariupol, and extensive shelling is underway to get Mariupol to capitulate. Again, Mariupol was a frontline city in its face-off against the Eastern Separatists, so there has been quite a bit of combat power in Mariupol. That combat power cannot leave the city at this point because it is enveloped by the Russians. And even if it was not completely enveloped on the ground, again, if these forces or any forces in Mariupol would have attempted to leave Mariupol along some of these main routes, again, not a lot of foliage, it's open farmland, they probably would have been engaged by Russian tactical air assets and destroyed on some of these highways. But that's the status within the Mariupol area of operations. And then finally, we continue to see the Russians maneuver mainly both northwest and north of Crimea. First, I want to talk about Indihar. And again, this is where we get this misinformation from the mainstream media. If you turned on your TV, especially here in the United States, your headline would have been, Russia attacks nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant on fire. And some actually reported a release of radiation, which was incorrectly reported. So, again, we're gonna zoom in here, and here are the facts. This prevents misinformation. This is a city. For all intents and purposes, it is a very large city. This is the nuclear power plant. You have the residential buildings to the east where people live and work, and then also to the south of it as well. These are the reactors. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe these are the RBK reactors, same reactors I believe that were in that were at Chernobyl as well. So highly encourage you to watch the movie Chernobyl. Good program, but on HBO. But the fighting that they're talking about and the shelling and the fire that was reported was way over in this area near the admin buildings. So again, the fighting and all, for all intents and purposes, was probably a good mile and a half from the actual reactors. At no time do we believe the reactors were in any danger of being shelled. And again, it's just this vitriolic narrative coming from the mainstream media designed to get the population worked up and for whatever reason to get ratings or what have you. But at no time was the reactors on fire. And look, the Russians are not stupid. They're not going to shell these reactors and destroy a nuclear power plant for Christ's sakes. It's just not going to happen. And again, it's just really deplorable how we see the narrative coming out of a lot of these mainstream media outlets in terms of what they are reporting and how they are reporting. And I'm going to talk more about that here in a second as well, because it should be greatly concerning to you, the viewer. And then finally, we're seeing the Russians continue to move and maneuver in the west. We have heard about pitched battles taking place here in Mykolaiv. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Hopefully, if not, I apologize. It would appear that the Russians had penetrated into the city again. These are more or less of these reconnaissance in force, just to see how much resistance is present on the ground. And in this case, we are hearing that there is significant forces of the Ukrainian military and territorial defenses that are fighting within the confines of the city. And the Russians actually had to pull back. And now what we're going to see is that envelopment of the city, followed by classic Russian operational art of bringing in artillery and reducing the opposing force as they identify it inside of the city. And that's just the way it's going to happen. That is the Russian way of war, and that's the way they're designed. If you look at their brigade combat structures, divisional combat structures, they have a lot of artillery, and they use artillery. They are not going to change their doctrine in the middle of a conflict to appease media outlets. They're just not going to do that, and they're going to continue with their operation, and it's not going to be pleasant. But here we are, and this is what is happening. So what I want to talk about now is what we're seeing now is the cancel culture. The cancel culture in the West is actually being utilized in this conflict. So for whatever reason, the West is not looking at anything that is taking place in terms of this conflict in an impartial way. And you have to try and look at what is happening from even your enemy's side in order to, at some point, try and resolve the conflict. They have demonized the Russians, and many people believe that the Russians should in fact be demonized. But that's for a later debate. But obtaining information is still very, very important. And when you start canceling entire news networks, so for instance, RT, Russia Today, and then Sputnik have been eliminated from the Apple devices. So you can no longer download and watch Russia Today or Sputnik. Very, very difficult to, well, it's not very difficult to do. You just have to go into your browser and go through that route in order to watch it. But Russia Today is now fired all its staff in the United States, and be Russia Today in America, and that's now gone. But what I'll tell you, and again, this is very important, that in the early days of the conflict, while the Ukrainian government was reporting that all individuals on Snake Island, 13, were killed by the Russian forces, RT and Sputnik were in fact reporting that 82 individuals had been captured on Snake Island and had been transported to Sevastopol and were being given food and shelter, and were now prisoners of war. And we saw video footage of that on Sputnik and Russia Today. And in fact, that was proven correct. So the information that was coming out of RT in Sputnik was valid information with video evidence. And then later, the Ukrainian government and even Western media outlets had to retract their initial statements that all 13 on Snake Island were killed, when in fact 80 individuals on Snake Island were taken as prisoners of war, and then again transported to Sevastopol. But right now we're now seeing that those outlets that we were hearing the Russian side of the conflict have been completely eliminated. It's outright censorship by big tech, and that's exactly what we have seen even before this conflict with persons that big tech did not like their narrative, and they wanted to create a false narrative, so they enter into the realm of this cancel culture. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing Microsoft pull out of Russia. We're seeing Airbnb pull out of Russia. Russia is being canceled. And I don't know if that's going to help things. I think the more you isolate Russia and put Russia into the abyss, the more they're going to lash out in the end. And again, I think you have to look at, you've got to harken back to World War II, and you have to look at what happened with Japan. And in terms of some of the economic challenges that the Japanese faced prior to World War II, and kind of what made Japan resort to military force. Again, the military option is just, again, it's the extension of the political process by alternative means. Von Clausewitz, right? But yeah, it's a very, very messy situation, and it's not going to end anytime soon. The whole concept of seizing Kiev in 72 hours was completely erroneous, and something that I don't know why the U.S. military was even looking at such a timeline, because it was just near impossible. Now, with that being said, I am getting a lot of comments in the comment section of, hey, why is this taking so long for the Russian military to do what they are doing? And what's different that they're doing from the American military? They believe that this would have been a lot quicker if it would have been the U.S. military. And yes, there are some technological advantages that the United States military has over the Russians, and I don't think that is necessarily what is preventing a rapid collapse of the Ukrainian military. I think it's one crucial element that is not in the Russian playbook that we're not really seeing in this conflict, and I'll try to explain to you what that is right now. So if this was the United States way of war, you have to understand its cost benefit. So a cruise missile, $1 to $2 million a pop. A javelin is $100,000 a pop. But hypothetically speaking, let's say you're trying to seize Mariupol, and you have 2 brigade commanders in Mariupol that you need to get them to tell their troops to lay down their arms. Well, you don't necessarily do that by bombing the living hell out of their units. What you do is you reach out to those 2 brigade commanders, you reach out to both of the deputy commanders and even some of the battalion commanders and say, hey guys, I tell you what, this time next week, you will have yourself a house in, let's say, here, Pompano Beach, Florida. You like Pompano Beach. Who doesn't like Pompano Beach, Florida? Well, you will have a house 5 blocks. There it is right there. This will be yours. You'll have a pool. You'll have a pool home, just a walk from the water. And furthermore, you'll also have $2 million in a bank account. And you'll have full U.S. citizenship, living right here in Pompano Beach, Florida, with $2 million in your account. All I need you to do is get that military unit to lay down their weapons. And again, this time next week, you're sitting right here on the beach, my man, with $2 million. I guarantee you that guy's like, all right, I'm making $2,000 a month living in Ukrainian subsidized housing in Mariupol. What should I do? That is the American way of war. And not entirety, but that is a component that prevents the United States from then having to fire off 100 cruise missiles costing $200 million instead of just getting 1 brigade commander at a cost of $2 million and the cost of the house to flee to the United States and lay down their weapon system. So that is the difference that we're probably seeing between some of the Russian doctrine and that of the United States. The Russians really don't have that capability. There's no Pompano Beach, Florida, and they're dealing with rubles, and it's just a lot different. And it's much more difficult for the Russians to conduct that sort of activity like the United States would utilize. in said conflict. And again, the U.S. used that quite often in Afghanistan. In many cases, it was suitcases full of money. And then obviously Iraq, it was the Pompano Beach strategy. Hey, General so-and-so, you can be in Pompano Beach, Florida this time next week. All your kids will be enrolled in engineering programs at Florida State or Gainesville. And here you go. Sign here. And that's that. And that's the way it's done. But again, the Russians don't really employ that, and it's not being done. And instead, they're going to bomb the living hell out of Mariupol and gain compliance through superior firepower. And we're all going to watch it on TV, unfortunately. But that's the status right now. Again, it's just more of a methodical drive by the Russians, classic Russian warfare, that is not going to be pretty, but in the end will probably be effective in achieving its desired military outcome. That's all we have. We'll have more very, very soon. Have a good day, everybody.